I'm excited today because we have Celina Su, who is a professor who wrote a book that I really enjoyed called Budget Justice. And I had the pleasure of interviewing her in front of a big group of students earlier this year to talk about her book. And I thought everything we were talking about was so amazing. We got to have it on the podcast. We know a little bit about our city's budgets. We know that, police get a big share of the pie. We know when not enough money is going to fixing the streets of potholes and creating bike lanes and visible crosswalks. We can recognize more so when things are not being funded than when things are being funded. But the thing is, a budget isn't just, okay, here's the things that we got to map out for the city this year. It should reflect the public's priorities. We should be actively involved in what our tax money and what our city funds. There's something I'd never heard of called participatory budgeting, which is when communities are allowed to influence funding decisions. And that creates a lot of transparency in budgeting. I, 7 months ago, did not really know how to read a city budget. I've since become more able to, but even I am confused, and it takes a lot to dig into what does this mean, and is this an authority that has to do with this, and what is this connected to? And as Celina and I talk about, it's made purposefully confusing because they don't really want people like me and you to hear what's going on and be able to complain about it, or not really complain, do activism around it, allow for significant changes in budget allocation. So I really love the idea that you can just create a budget proposal for something that you want and propose it. It's your money. It's your city. So without further ado, here's our incredible interview with Celina Su. Oh, and just a little thing. After we had already booked her, so don't think that this is kissing up, but she was asked to join Zohran Mamdani's New York City mayor transition team. No big deal.
You told a lot of lies about achievement. They called you when they got you to believe it. Thumb and finger held to their foreheads in an L shape, trapped in a capitalist hellscape. Let's fight back and have some talks about class and the massive cost of the disasters. Plots of fascists and Nazis, fat cats and fox. It's 1,000 natural shocks. A Bad with Money podcast.
Hello and welcome to 1,000 Natural Shocks, a Bad with Money podcast. I'm your host, Gabe Dunn. And with me today, we have Celina Su. Do you want to tell my audience who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Celina Su. I live in New York City. Officially, I'm a professor and a chair in urban studies at the City University of New York, which is our local public university. But I also just pay attention to how everyday folks try to participate in politics.
So congratulations on your new gig, working with Zohran Mamdani. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there and how that happened?
Sure, I can tell you how it happened. I will say that I think it was a week and a half ago. The transition team got announced, and it's been really exciting with the subcommittees that I'm a part of. The week before, I was getting a bunch of text messages and assuming they were spam and thus ignoring them for days until Friday, they started leaving me voicemails and I was like, oh, this transition team is real. Okay, these are real calls to actually address. And then over the weekend, I signed some documents, etc. And we have some pretty specific directives on what to do in the next few weeks to try to set some key policy recommendations. So hopefully a little bit of a policy agenda and to help to nominate folks for the high up positions like commissioner, etc. And I'm part of a subcommittee. One exciting little bit is that I'm part of a new subcommittee on community organizing. So we'll see if the new administration really engages communities differently than the current outgoing one does.
What would be the ideal change with community organizing being part of this?
I think that One potential model lies in what Mamdani is going to do with school governance. So right now there's mayoral control of schools. There's really little opportunity for educators, even the teachers who work in schools, and for parents and families and students to help to articulate the policies that they're governed by. So, and Mamdani has said that he wants to replace mayoral control with a new system of school governance that they're going to construct. And for me, I'm curious about whether there's opportunities for that sort of engagement and that sort of community input and even co-governance in other policy areas like food and transit and the budget.
Well, your book is about budgets. And can you talk a bit about how that became something you were interested in?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to go Vanna White for a second, even though I don't know if that's a reference people even know. And here's the book. But, and it might be blurry, sorry. So, I wasn't into budgets myself as a research topic or something I thought I would ever write a book about until the 2020 uprisings after the murder of George Floyd and the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw in the face of state failure, where people weren't getting protective equipment. We didn't know if our hospitals would have enough ventilators. We saw frontline workers really dying at higher rates than folks elsewhere, that people were really talking about how budgets made a difference. And then explicitly during the uprisings after the murder of George Floyd, I saw the phrase budget justice on so many placards in the streets. And I was like, that's usually a pretty wonky term. And I had been studying a process called participatory budgeting, in which everyday folks like you and me, not elected officials, help to allocate public funds from city budgets for a while, for a few years by then, by 2020. But I had always paid attention to the participatory part of participatory budgeting or PB. I hadn't been paying attention to the B part of budgets. And so then I started to look into it a little bit, and I realized that they're so incredibly intimidating and hard to read. I recently met an organizer from Birmingham, Alabama, who called Gabriel Caban Cubero, and we were talking about how so many of these public documents come in PDF form so that you can't even download them for basic number crunching or just even figuring out what's going on. And they say that PDF stands for pretty damn fucked. And I'll have to say that I agree. And the more research I did, the more I realized that, like, these budgets are not, yes, they're technical, they're complicated, but they don't have to be that hard to read. And the way that they're hidden, put away, and made so intimidating is actually an anti-democratic move that makes it harder for us to hold elected officials accountable. So I had to actually restrain myself from getting into the public finance literature. I had to remind myself to be like, it's not our job to become experts. It's their job to tell us how they're reflecting our needs and how they're making political choices. Politicians keep saying that their hands are tied, but once I dug into it a little bit more, I could see just enough to see that there's so many political choices being made. Like last year, New York City paid $240 million to settle police malpractice lawsuits.
I knew you were going to say that. I didn't even know that number, and I knew that's what was coming.
Well, just because to me that's just so gross and heartbreaking that police brutality that should not be happening in the first place is being settled with our public dollars. And when I looked up how much preschool costs, that money could be used to get free preschool for 15,000 kids. You know, like Mamdani's promise for universal childcare. We could get things like that if we weren't automatically paying for other things.
That's what's so interesting about the turn my life has taken since June when LA became occupied. Like, I knew numbers, like I knew a little bit to know that, oh, the police budget is really big. Again, similarly to you, that came after 2020, the summer of 2020. But I learned how to read all of this stuff. Like, the frustration that I have is similar to what you're saying, which is like, okay, why did I have to take time out of my life to learn how to read a city budget when how many people are going to do that? Probably not that many. And I, agree with you that I realized a lot of stuff was hidden in there. And a group of us have started looking at the ways that city council votes. Like, that's all public. It's kind of this strange thing that so much is public. Like, you can just find it. They're banking on you not. And with lawsuits, we held this town hall with Mayor Bass that we had to push so hard to get. And one of the things that our city controller had come out and said is that in his audit that, they paid $400 million in LA, LAPD lawsuits. And then her response was, well, it's a lot of LAPD suing itself, or people suing, officers suing LAPD, which is not true. But also I was like, that's not a flex. That's also bad.
Yes, why would we want to spend our money on this when people are starving or lacking housing?
Hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. I need the right person with the right background who can move our business forward. If I wanted candidates who match what I'm looking for, I'd trust Indeed-sponsored jobs. I actually found my job on Indeed, and it was so easy to search through what I wanted to do and my skills and find the right place that was looking for exactly what I could offer. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post even seen on other sites. Give your job the best chance to be seen with Indeed-sponsored jobs. They help you stand out and hire quality candidates who can drive the results you need. Sponsored jobs boost your posts for quality candidates so you can reach the exact people you want faster. And it makes a big difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs because you reach a bigger pool of quality candidates. Join the 1.6 million companies that sponsor their jobs with Indeed. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. Now with Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/badwithmoney. Just go to Indeed.com/badwithmoney right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/badwithmoney. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. What is that about? Because, we'll get to other stuff, but why do the police have such a hold? There's rumors that they go and intimidate politicians. I don't know. That's probably true. But why is this the stranglehold?
I think that probably the reasons vary according to the city and the context. But one potential reason is that some cities, not necessarily the coastal ones like LA and New York, but a lot of cities, especially between the coasts in the US, actually have been so starved of federal and state funds that they rely on police fines for public services. So Ferguson, I will need a minute to look up the number, but police ticket fines, etc., are the second largest source of revenue for the town where Michael Brown died. And
wait, the police are getting fined? The police paying fines?
No, police are fining people
got
to
it.
pay for services.
Oh boy.
So it's like extract what Jackie Wang in Carceral Capitalism calls extraction and looting. And in a town of, I think it was like 16,000 people or something like that, there were more than one moving violations per capita. There were like something like 30,000 moving violations the year that Michael Brown died. And then they put fines on top of fines. If you don't show up to court, you get fined, and then you end up in jail, and then you have... So one aspect of policing is that everything else gets cut away, but police stay, and they're used to make life worse in the surveillance state almost that we have at the expense of the welfare state. So it's also like almost a different side of government. So then what usually suffers from budget cuts. And then another aspect of it is who lives in cities, which we unfortunately see right now with Trump calling cities hellholes, etc., as if cities are the problem. But cities are where different people live in dense places and there's like scale and there's just more folks around. And it's also where Americans who are people of color disproportionately live. I think that there's a lot of non-white folks in rural and suburban areas also, but they're largely represented in cities. And so it ends up being tied up with cultural politics also of who's deserving of decent benefits and some help from the state. So then there's talk of not letting these people go to school, not letting these people get health care, but these people should be policed. So, and we see that also in how there are a lot of state-level preemption laws. Preemption is when the state doesn't allow the city to set its own policies, so overriding home rule. And a lot of states in the U.S. right now are passing preemption laws that ban cities within those states from passing sanctuary city laws. So I feel like all these things are tied up together of like who deserves welfare benefits or a basic social safety net versus who should be policed. And we need money. And where should we get that money?
It's interesting because your book is called Budget Justice, and I feel people don't understand the word like budget violence, I think, in a lot of ways, like the ways in which, budget justice is in opposition to this is violence. Like the way that money is used against people in cities or the way things are voted on. People are like, oh, violence is just somebody punching someone else. But it's not, because budget justice has to operate in opposition to literal like violence. You're talking about people being, fined on top of fined, sent to jail. That is violence that then perpetuates more and more of the carceral state in that area, generational trauma. I can see why things are hidden in budgets or hidden in almost one line of a budget, bylines of a budget. There's also things that are connected, at least in my experience, things that are connected to each other that are separate in a budget. So that makes you have to really think about, oh, this goes with this. And do you think that it's a way for people to hide things, or are we misunderstanding what sort of compromises need to be made when the cities are putting together a budget?
I think both. And I love this framing of budget violence because even really simply putting aside the police for a moment, the budget is where we find out which public hospitals remain open and which ones close, which fire departments remain open, which get closed. I mean, think about LA and the wildfires. During the fiscal crisis in New York in the 1970s, some of the biggest contestations had to do with people really wanting their local fire engines to stay in their neighborhoods because they knew that if they didn't, people were more likely to die if there was a fire. So politicians talk about how their hands are tied and how budgets are neutral, but they really show where our public priorities are and what social problems and whose social problems are tolerated and which ones should be addressed right away. And in terms of hiding what's going on, I think that budgets also do that because with this talk of there not being enough money, it becomes harder to trace where the money goes in some ways. And with the police examples that you just raised, we see that austerity doesn't exactly mean smaller government. It just means a different sort of government that's a little bit more carceral and surveilling. A lot of the school policies that deny school funding for students, books, and teachers still give schools a lot of money that they then have to pay to third-party contractors for new high-stakes testing software, for metal detectors, for this or that. So in a lot of ways, we don't have smaller government with these budget cuts. We actually have just different sorts of government that are measuring us, surveilling us, or giving public subsidies to stadiums and developers in different ways. Like where I live in Brooklyn, we had the city use eminent domain to displace a number of families a while ago to build Barclays Center at Atlantic Pacific. And they promised over 1,000 affordable housing units. They have yet to build 800 of those. After more than a decade, and they got millions of dollars of subsidies. They were paying fines they were supposed to pay fines along the way. We haven't collected a cent. But that's not part of the annual budget. That's just somehow written off as a special thing. So there's lots of ways in which both the trade-offs that are there aren't clear, as you said, and also they're actively hiding where they are giving people money.
I always am like, just tell us what the compromise was. They don't. But I try to be like, what happened? Was it like behind the scenes? Because is this something you actually believe? You believe that we should cut money from homeless services? Or was there some sort of trade-off where you were like, as you say, hands tied, right? Where not that your hands are tied for inaction, but that you were like, okay, well, if we don't do that, then a bunch of preschoolers aren't going to go to school. Like, tell us, what did you give up to get? You know what I mean? Because we're not privy to the compromises and the reasons for things a lot of times, most of the time. So it looks like, hey, you guys took, this is a real example, you guys took $150,000 out of homeless services to give to the police. Why? You know what I mean? Like, what was the thinking beyond like, we voted? I'm like, I wouldn't even be mad if I could just understand why, like what is going on behind the scenes. And I've talked to like friends, well, they're not friends. I've talked to people that I know that are working in different city council members' offices. And I'm like, listen, just tell me what the truth is. What is going on? Because I'm mad at them for this. But if you tell me, oh, we had to do this because otherwise, then I'll understand. But you keep it so opaque that I'm like only left to think, well, is this what you really believe?
There's no opportunity to get real answers like that. They're allowed to just get away with keeping everything hidden. I have my guesses that at least in a lot of places, the police unions don't act with the other unions, and they're progressive unions and they're conservative unions, police being one extreme. But to me, in the end, it's about political clout and power, but I feel like a good politician should have I'm trying to think of something gender neutral because I just thought of balls, but like
I was going to say have the balls, yeah.
or ovaries or whatever to stand up for that, to say, to say, sorry, until we figure out a better system, I can't have police revolting in potentially harmful ways.
Mm-hmm. Just say that.
And I promise, and maybe then, like, I promise that it will go towards this specific part of police programming. Like, why unleash counterterrorism units that are so violent against peaceful student encampments?
Right.
Even the police, everyday New Yorkers have a range of opinions to different parts of the police. And they're able to try to inform priorities a little bit, but we don't get any chance to do so.
Has there ever been like a massive shift, like in a budget, has there ever been, because I feel like it's always these little like trickles or whatever. Has there ever been like a, hey, you know what? We're taking $1 billion from you and we're giving it to this thing? Or is it always kind of small?
So during 2020 in New York, de Blasio claimed to have shifted $1 billion from the police to other services. He did that partly with a sort of cheat in that he shifted school safety officers who are de facto police from the police department line to the schools line, alongside more real substantive shifts that really changed services that weren't just like on paper. But that shows that power matters, that as you sort of suggested, it's not actually necessarily about changing their minds on whether this is better or that's better. There's got to be political clout attached. Because I don't think that de Blasio suddenly thought that homelessness services were so much more important, especially someone who's a progressive mayor like him. It's about pushing the mayor or giving them the clout so that they fear the backlash from people who want and need and are fighting for these services in a city we can afford, etc., more than they fear the backlash from the real estate lobby and the police. And so that's one example that's more recent. In Brazil, where they introduced that process of PB, participatory budgeting, they shut down all the other channels, including the for negotiation, including the backroom dealings. So they made the powerful groups like the police union, etc., have to all present their cases alongside everyday residents. And they shifted huge parts of the budget that way. So that's why that process became famous around the world and is in 11,000 or more cities around the world. But there they actually lowered infant mortality, helped the public to say no to proposals that they didn't feel were ultimately in the community interest, like luxury developments. They, like here, I feel like there will be community groups that say, like, this is not really good for our neighborhood, but most of the time it goes through. And at best, maybe the community got some promises of jobs or affordable housing units that hopefully, unlike here in Brooklyn, actually get built. There, they actually managed to shift big parts of the budget, but that might also partly be because the government took the process seriously and it wasn't just a side process. And the people were organized, like they just helped to topple a military dictatorship. So here, we need to build enough power so that when we do have some channels to make demands or to make city council or the mayor listen to us. We have enough numbers and are aligned on an analysis or some sort of ask so that they're like, oh, okay, we better pay attention.
Can you explain participatory budgeting?
Porto Alegre in Brazil in 1989 was the first place that did the city-level participatory budgeting. In New York, it's been around since 2011, which is the same time as Occupy Wall Street, which is not a coincidence. When so many folks were gathering in public spaces, first at Zuccotti Park near Wall Street, but then around the country to talk about economic class and inequalities as a huge issue. And so it's not a coincidence that PB in New York started at the same time as Occupy Wall Street. And it's a process in which there are assemblies, usually by neighborhood, where people come together and just talk about what they think their communities need. And you think that's so simple, but it's actually really interesting because there were a lot of conversations. I can't tell you how many where I saw someone come in with an agenda and they changed their minds. Like there was someone from the Upper West Side, white presenting, I'm guessing middle or upper class income, who came to an assembly to advocate for something for his kid's school. And then he's like, wait a second, you senior citizens in East Harlem, public housing, lack physical mobility, and don't have washer dryers? I'm actually going to rescind my proposal and help you develop yours. And I
Wow.
watched dozens, if not hundreds, of conversations like that, which made me think, oh, when else do we talk to each other rather than having pre-made 2-minute statements that hopefully don't devolve to yelling? When else do we talk to people unlike ourselves to work on something together with a pot of money? So the New York process, the pot of money isn't big. It's like $1 million per district, per city council district, but it got people started in a concrete way so that it's not about abstract human rights. It was about stuff that they could see, and then they would talk and work together instead of choosing from a menu of pre-made options. And so often in the voting booth, it's like choosing from the lesser evil. So they got to actually think creatively a tiny bit. And then, so that's the first most interesting phase. Then some volunteer folks help to develop some of those ideas into ballot items, and then people vote on which ones get funded. And to me, participatory budgeting is interesting because it gets people to relate to one another as neighbors and maybe build on mutual aid networks or the sorts of passions and interests and demands that they articulated partly through protests and try to do something more with it.
Not even protests, like what you're talking about with the, I think, senior center you said in Harlem. I love that because it's such a tangible thing. Like we need washer dryers and we need accessibility, and people can see that. That is something that they can see change, that they know exactly what they need to do. It's not some nebulous policy. Like it is something that even if you don't get it into the budget, someone hears that and they go, I could pay for that. It's like this thing where you wouldn't even know this person's problem because you would never talk about it, or you would never hear about it, or you would never think. You would never walk by a building and go, oh, I wonder if they have washer dryers. So like it's magical.
Yeah. And then I saw people be like, oh, I hadn't thought about kids with special needs. Why don't we change the playground design to have more fun play structures that accommodate kids with disabilities and adults with different sorts of physical needs? And people ended up just making connections they hadn't anticipated. And actually in Brazil, the cities that had PB ended up collecting a lot more in taxes because of exactly what you just said. When people know that that public funds are being put to good use, the notion of higher taxes is no longer political kryptonite. People are like, okay. And then
Yes.
they might not give as much to charity for that one awful
Yeah.
GoFundMe case because it's less likely to happen.
Right. Yes. I know. That's how I feel too. Because oftentimes I'll go to the park in my city because I'm like, I paid for this. This is mine. And I got to use it.
Yeah, and it's so hard to break out of the current vicious cycle where we rightfully wonder where the fuck is our money going to, and then we don't trust government, and then we don't have a say, and then we trust government less. So how to break out of that vicious cycle and build a different virtuous one is I think a question of democracy. It's not about finding the exact right answer. Do we really need that much more research to show that small class sizes help? I mean, or it's about changing power dynamics.
How do these people figure out what things cost? If you have $1 million, how do you know what it will cost to fix potholes? Like, how do you come up with that as just a regular guy?
Well, in these processes, they always have city agency folks or city government workers on call to help people develop their proposals. And that can be a double-edged sword because a lot of these people who in political science are called street-level policymakers because like social workers, police officers, the bureaucrat behind the desk who decides whether you're eligible for these benefits or not, they make decisions. They don't make the grand policy, but they sort of make policy.
Yeah.
And they're both facilitators, like, let me help you develop your proposal, and gatekeepers, like, I'm not sure this is eligible for often a technical reason. So that's the other part of this I ended up having to spend so much more time on than I anticipated because I didn't think I was going to research bureaucracy. That does not sound exciting to me. But the everyday folks who I was working with were talking about some of the bureaucrats the way we were just talking about the politicians and city council members. And so in Brazil or other places, they've actually worked with government workers to be like, we gotta be on the same page. You have this technical expertise, but other folks have knowledge too. Like at the assemblies I attended, some of the grown-ups in the room were really wary of youth participation. They're like, whatever, 9-year-olds are just gonna ask for skate parks. And yeah, they asked for skate parks, but they quickly moved on in less than 1 minute to talk about a bunch of stuff that even well-meaning experts might not have anticipated, like 103rd Street between this block avenue and that avenue feels dodgy in the after-school hours, and lighting on this street feels like it would be more helpful than lighting on that street. And they can articulate what sacrifices they're more willing to make than others and what they really need. So changing how government helps people develop proposals and how much things cost is also a huge issue. One of the city workers I interviewed said the problem with everyday folks is they have, this is the part I'm going to quote, a champagne taste with a beer pocketbook. They were just dripping with disdain. And that's not what we want from government workers who are there to serve the people.
Yeah, there's a lot of disrespect for people coming in and asking for things and having questions, I think, because there's this air of, well, we know this and you don't, instead of working collaboratively with. What are some things in budgets that people might not even know is in a budget?
Sure. So the staffing it takes to process our benefits, whether it's of folks who want to apply for benefits like food assistance or to process birth certificates or for name changes or whatever. Because I had to change part of my kid's birth certificate at one point, and I was just watching people in the waiting room saying, I need this now in order to get onto my partner's health insurance, in order to do this, in order to do that. So people are aware of big things in public, like library hours, etc., which are so essential. But there's a lot of hidden stuff also where that really just help our city to work. I will also say that our cities also pay a lot in loan interest
What
that
do you mean?
feels sort of predatory. Like there's a lot of municipal debt, and that there's a lot of folk who talk about how cities should have the right to renegotiate their debt terms
Oh.
so that they're spending money on services and infrastructure.
Where are they getting loans from?
Private banks.
Oh, no. And how much influence does that give the private bank? I mean, they collect interest and then...
A lot because of the bond rating situation, because cities issue bonds in order to pay for new schools, say, and stuff like that. And in the end, just as credit ratings and SAT scores are both sort of based on real tests and real measures, but sort of distorted and not at all helpful. Like, yeah, SAT scores measure something, but
what? We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, once they hold household income constant, most studies show that differences in SAT scores by racial background go away. So it might be a better measure of class than class
Credit
background
well.
than school. So bond ratings also, they're both like sort of a measure of a city's financial health and also have been controversial and debated in the past because it's not a science.
What are bond ratings?
Bond ratings are grades that underwriter or other companies give to different cities' bonds, like A+++.
What's a city bond? Like, who will buy that?
I think individuals, but also funds.
Okay.
Other funds will buy that. That's the other issue that ends up being, that's another example of an issue that is partly technical, so not that many folks know about it, but it's also very political, and more people should know about the basics. I'm trying to educate myself on it, but, who has debt and what kind of debt is allowed to be renegotiated, that part is political. Like the fact that universities in the U.S. don't give enough grants for students to attend, and that so many students end up with so much debt, and that until recently, when you declared personal bankruptcy, other sorts of debt could be renegotiated, but not student debt, that's political.
Yes, definitely. I have been surprised by the amount of debt cities are in. The job of the controller is to audit these things. One of the jobs. And our in LA, it seems that our controller is in deep opposition with our mayor. They seem to be really at odds. I don't know if that's normal, but it seems as though no, I know. He will say a number and she will go, no. Like he'll be like, we're this much in debt. And she'll be like, we're not. And I have seen that in other, we've been traveling a lot to California City because they opened an ICE detention center there illegally. And so a bunch of us have been going there, and they're also like super shady. Like they'll be like, no, we're not in debt. Or, sometimes then at the city council is wild there. Or they'll be like, oh yeah, we're $600 million in debt. So that's why we need to be okay with CoreCivic opening a prison here. Like it's not transparent.
I did think it was wild when my kid was entering, I think, pre-K or one of the earlier grades in public school. And I saw in the news that, I can't remember the exact numbers, but that there was going to be $270 million in cuts to New York City schools. And then the comptroller said, no, it's actually $370 million. I'm like, what's up with these numbers?
Yes, I know.
And again, I think that even without going into the spreadsheets and suddenly becoming experts on financing, it's clear that they're using revenue projections or different sorts of numbers that for which they have to guess in very specific political ways to forward a specific narrative. Like one common one recently in New York is that the current mayor has underprojected revenues, which justify cuts that are like just unrealistic. It's like an unrealistically tight budget. So then the departments of sanitation, collecting garbage, whatever, spend more than their budget, but it's actually what's expected and what's normal. But then the mayor says that they were fiscally irresponsible because they outspent their artificially low budget.
Wow.
So I don't know exactly how the different numbers are calculated, but I have read about enough patterns to see that, like, most mayors try to be conservative and have low projections for their revenues, but the recent one that we have now is a little bit wild. And then he keeps saying that the agencies are being greedy and irresponsible when it's partly because he keeps issuing artificially low numbers. It's like,
oh my God. And that's crazy that he would say that about sanitation when he hates the rats so much.
I don't think he said it about sanitation specifically.
Sanitation is probably his most favorite budget.
I would think so, yeah.
He is. Please. Yeah. I hate the rats. We're at war with the rats.
It's more like education, libraries, yeah.
Yeah. If you're not an American, if you're not familiar with the mayor of New York that Mamdani is taking over from, his name is Eric Adams, and he's crazy. If you should watch Z-Way interview him if you want a taste of the current mayor of New York. But he does wage war against the rats. That's his big thing.
And partying at night.
He loves to party. Yeah, that's true. So you think the best way moving forward to get your item on the budget or to get attention is to have an organization behind you, like a big organization that you maybe went to with a proposal, or should you bring a proposal? Like when you go to city council and we're upset about something, we want to tell them we're upset, but would it help to have like a board, like a science fair board with like, here's my idea?
I think that giving people starting points to then tweak and talk back to is really helpful, because one expected common refrain from a lot of politicians and policymakers is, oh, it's so easy to critique. You do the work, or it's much harder to have a vision. And that is what most folks don't receive as many opportunities to do. So even having a little bit and working with others, it doesn't have to be a big official group. It does something. I mean, I do think that we need more spaces to dream bigger and imagine differently, to not accept this as normal. Like I think that No Kings protests were a really nice start, but it's not the greatest dream. Like no monarchy. I want something a lot better than just a lack of monarchy.
Yeah.
We've been trained to choose the lesser of two evils, to deal with budget cuts, to fight for crumbs of the budget pie. We need more spaces to connect with others and keep dreaming bigger and present some of those visions to tell folks that we won't accept the same. At the same time, in the meantime, because that's like a more of a long-term dream, I think that just complaining has its merits. In New York, so many of the participatory budgeting funds were spent on elementary school bathrooms so that 7-year-olds didn't have to hold in their pee all day for basic repairs, that people got really upset by the PB process rather than energized. At first they were energized and they're like, why are we spending discretionary funds and developing projects to do something the city should just be doing on its own?
Right. That's the thing.
And enough people complained so that in the 4th year or so of PB in New York, the government quietly doubled the school's bathroom budget from 70 to 140 million, which was bigger than the entire PB process.
Wow.
And they weren't out in the streets, but that's the kind of thing that they didn't think of, especially if they weren't parents of school kids, and that they complained about. And then the city said, oh, there's popular pressure around us. And then there have been other interesting projects where people said, we want a down payment to make these subway stations accessible. And if we get the down payment through, that should put pressure on you to kick in the rest of the money. We want diaper networks around the city based on our mutual aid networks. So ways of people thinking of things that the city is not already doing that they should do, and then demanding resources for them.
Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you and your book? And I guess the maybe keep track of the work with Mamdani. It's very exciting.
So I'm at celinasu.net, CELINASU.net. And then Linktree is where I post things. Budget Justice is the book, and I'll share a URL and a discount code if that's at all helpful. And I'm also just excited to hear about people's own experiences and notes trying to fight for better towns, cities, wherever you live. I think that that's where we can start to do work to make our lives better. And especially when stuff sucks at the federal level, what does it mean to scale sideways instead of up?
1,000 Natural Shocks, a Bad with Money podcast, is a production of Noted Bisexual, produced by Melisa D. Monts and Diamond MPrint Productions, and music by Zach Sherwin as sung by Sam Barbera. Thank you, love you, bye.